basically the law from the past, the fundamentalism has a tough time saying anything is problematic from the past. The past becomes, what's new is forbidden, and what's past is good. That's the fundamental conservative position. So this article basically called into question the law that was still on the books. And there were laws in the books from the medieval period that said, you know, a doctor or somebody shouldn't save the life of an idolater, meaning a non-Jew, on the Sabbath. And I called into question and I raised it in the context of the discriminatory laws or discriminatory behavior going on in Israel between treatment of Jewish citizens and non-Jewish citizens, and in particular the difference between the territories and inside Israel. Now, on a certain level, it wasn't entirely fair because the state of Israel is a secular state, and its problems with double treatment of people who are beyond their borders versus people in their borders is a universal problem even in democracies, right? All these wonderful democracies of the West have a completely double standard between who's a citizen and who's not a citizen. And of course now we know it's a slippery slope. The more comfortable you are with torturing or brutalizing non-citizens, one of these days you end up, doing it to your own, right? This is the whole. But there is a dichotomy in the secular approach of citizens and non-citizens. But I was claiming that there's something deeper going on, and that there are things about Jewish religion that have to be faced and that have to be changed, and that these laws about valuing life have to be absolutely universal, and they have to be taught that way in the seminaries. They have to be taught that way in the seminaries. So, the article, huge hue and cry against the article. And there were funding implications, and people were, some people took away their money from a school, which I didn't expect. So the article was vilified, but not because it wasn't true, but because it exposed something in public. And that kind of dynamic or problem is what really represses honest confrontation and conversation and dialogue and debate between the religions today, because it's theater plus. It's theater plus the fact that this is a desecration of God for people to be honest about their problems in public. So for all these reasons, what you have to ask yourself as a fundamental question of conflict resolution is, what then? What is the alternative? Surely you don't mean people shouldn't talk at all. It's not a notion that communication is over. There's no possibility of communication. There is no peacemaking and conflict resolution without communication. The question is, what kind of communication? Both verbal communication, nonverbal communication. Because invariably in the alternatives we suggested, it always comes to dialogue and debate. But the question is the context, the kind of people involved, what makes it more, more likely to lead to a real transformation. So the people that we've tracked in this field who are doing the most interesting work are the people who are experimenting with symbolic forms of communication, with gestures and symbols that are inherently transformative. I've talked to you in the past about, the sort of neo-Christian version of this in terms of the Richmond March. We talked about the March in Richmond. We talked about that. Okay, so that's an example of a Christian, neo-Christian effort to create a different kind of relationship between African Americans and Americans today that goes well beyond dialogue, debate, and it goes beyond legislation too. It's obvious, it should be obvious, that many conflicts have some resolution through legislation. But it also should be obvious that legislation, when there are deep wounds, is not necessarily enough to really heal the wounds of history. to really help people move beyond the grievances that they have. This is where actually religion has a lot of strengths, because religions and cultures are very, very rich in symbols, very rich in ways of communicating symbolically. If you think about the valuation of other people, what I've seen in, let's say greetings. When you greet other people, it has no functional value in a rationalistic society, right? We don't have to say good morning. We don't have to say goodbye. We don't have to say, God bless you. If you see, even God bless you is a religious term. What's the secular term for responding to somebody's sneeze? What, get out of my face? Or wash your hands, please?
Don't spray your hands.
What it is, not in that direction. What is it? So it's just like this thing, God bless you. But hello, and they're very often religious terms. Even what's it in Afghanistan? Khoda Hafiz? Khoda Hafiz?
Goodbye.
Yeah, but what does it mean, literally?
God, memory. God, you're in your peace memory.
May God be your protector.
May God be your protector.
Hafiz means memory, and Khoda is God. So something literally.
But in this sense, it means protector, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a debate, but God's definitely in there, right? Okay, God's definitely in there, and shalom in Hebrew, or salam alaikum, it definitely has divine aspects to it. Shalom is a name of God in Hebrew. So you're greeting somebody with God's name, which has actually had religious legal implications in Judaism. You're not supposed to, the original law is that you're not supposed to greet somebody in a bathroom. But it's because it was God's name. Of course, now in the more religious circles, it's just you don't say anything in the bathroom, but it's not really that. It's that it was a divine name, and you don't use a divine name in an unclean place, right? All of this ritual around greeting and valuing the other. There are parts of I don't know in the Catholic, but in the Protestant or liberal Protestant services I've been in, there's a certain point in the ceremony where people turn around and greet each other, right?
Pass the peace.
Catholics do that too.
Pass the peace.
Catholics do that. What is it called?
Passing the peace.
Passing the peace.
Peace be with you.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Now that's something that in the Jewish tradition, I don't know when it started, a couple of thousand years, but I'm not sure, it's just once a month. Once a month there's that passing of the peace when you're blessing the new moon. Blessing the new moon is a Jewish ritual, and they do that passing of the peace. And then, of course, at the end of every service, there is this ritual process of using God's name in that sense to bless people, particularly in the high holidays when you wish everyone that they have a good that they get a good decree in the high holidays for their health and wealth and welfare for the rest of the year. So what is all of this? These are moments of inherent valuation of the other human being. It's a ritual. It doesn't serve any rational function. It serves but a very communal emotional function of uplifting the other, of valuing the other. And what we found repeatedly is that the religious communities that are involved in peacemaking are particularly good at this. In some ways, in astonishing ways. I just had a birthday. It was a very big one. I was very depressed about it for a year. Glad it's over. And I turned 30. I'm glad it's over. See, you think it's really funny. Right? Very few people knew about it. I didn't really want anybody to know about it, and I'm workaholic, so I've gotten into my work a lot more. I used to know a lot more people, but with little children, you start to know less and less people. And it was just not something that anybody knew about. I used to have bigger birthdays. And So hardly anybody communicated with me, except for the one person who was part of that religious group that we described with the march in Washington, the march in Richmond, who had it down in his calendar every year, to contact me. And he has, I think, hundreds of people that he does this with. Because for him, that is an essential ritual of relationship. And lo and behold, he's absolutely right. There's not a single one of my coworkers here who knows when my birthday is. I could live and die, it's just the nature of very busy academic lives, and people just don't ask that. So what impact is that on me? It has a very strong impact on me. And we've seen this time and again, that it's these small gestures that actually are transformative in relationships, because it touches people in the deepest place. And I've tried to learn this again and again. I struggle between worlds, because on the one hand, I've grown up in a religious world. I kind of walked away from the fundamentalist world that I grew up in. And then I tried to be in academia, and especially the policymaking world in Washington, it grinds down your sense of your Buberian sense of the ultimate irreducible value of the other person in front of you. It grinds it down. Everybody becomes a tool. It just grinds you down. And so I keep trying to remember all of this, but it's very hard to do that in the context of a very cutthroat environment where everybody's basically useful for something until you're replaced. And then you don't even think about that person anymore. Life goes so fast and everybody's based on such usefulness that I have, you're not going to believe this, but I have on my speed dial for the secretary of a person that I have to report to a lot. I'm just always changing the name on the speed dial because she runs through secretaries so much. So I'm just, it's just keeping up with, oh, that's not her anymore, that's her, and so I'm always retyping this thing. What happened to the person? I didn't even say goodbye. It's just a speed dial change, This is what happens in a very rushed, overcrowded, and business-like culture. And it's very, very different than the spiritual universe that some people create where there's an inherent valuation of the other. This is the potential of religion. We all know the dark side. You've read the chapters. You know that the dark side of this, of course, is that this ultimate valuation of the other by religious traditions also seems to be accompanied by step out of line, and you're not just not part of the valuation, you're now part of the devil. You're now demonized. Step out of line sexually, step out of line in terms of what you do and don't do, and you can be demonized far more. And suddenly you have nothing. You have no human rights, you have no civil rights, you're out. So this is this dichotomy of religious valuation of the other. And obviously what I'm trying to propose in examining the pioneers of this is how they utilize these these valuations of the other that are so transformative. Now, in this particular project that I just came back from in Israel, did a lot of thinking about this, and two students. One student from ICAR who just graduated, his name is Jonah Geffen. He just got his master's. He also runs a program together with his father that they fund, they raise funds for, called Kivunim. And Kivunim basically is it's a kind of enlightened Zionist program for 20-year-olds. It brings them to Israel for a year, to have an intensive experience of the country, but it also brings them to 6 Arab countries. And it teaches them intensively both Hebrew and Arabic, which is very rare. Arabic is officially a language of Israel, but it's not effectively something that's taught, and the language divide is one of the many reasons for the different standards of citizenship or treatment. So this is a very avant-garde Zionist enterprise. And at the same time, I think they were looking to move this to a different level. And Jonah, as my student, was impressed with some of my, took this course, and then took a course of mine at Hebrew University, and which I'm going to be doing in January again, and was very moved and wanted us to experiment. And my other student, Manar Fawahri, was a current master's student. So we sat there for a couple of months in my dining room, and we came up with something different than dialogue. This is what I was going to talk to you about, something different than dialogue. It took a lot of brainstorming, and it took a lot of local knowledge, and basically we hit upon the notion of the Jewish young people in the program living with Arab families for just a few days, particularly families that had youth the same age, or approximately the same age. Why do we hit on that? For 2 reasons. First of all, because it's hard to describe how much across the Middle East the notion of hospitality is like at the core of a spiritual and cultural identity. And there's almost a competition, country to country, I've noticed, between who considers themselves more hospitable. There's also a religious overlay to this, because the Islamic and the Christian expression of this particularly focus on Abraham, founding father, as the quintessential hospitable, like the author of hospitality. And this goes back to the oldest biblical texts, which describe Abraham as somebody who loved strangers and had his tent open in all 4 directions, hoping that people would come, to visit him. In some ways, he's the first biblical evangelical. He is the quintessential missionizer. He is a missionary. He's seen that way in the oldest sources. But a missionary with intense love, that combination of love and mission, and welcoming of guests. So, like with all religious traditions, there is, cause and effect. Is it a causal connection? Did everybody believe in Abraham and therefore the Middle East is a hospitable place? I don't think so. I think that what happens is that your heroes become reflective of the things that you value the most. And this really is a distinctive thing. So we thought that 2 things had to happen. One is that Jewish-Arab dialogues, and many dialogues, are asymmetric. They're asymmetric for a number of reasons, because very often in conflicts, one group is more privileged than the other. Okay? The dialogue room, is artificial in that sense. That's yet another problem with it. It doesn't reflect that reality. But if members of a group that are more privileged if members of a group that are more privileged end up being hosted in a culture that values hosting, what you're doing is inverting all the relationships. If you're in a situation where there's a minority and they are used to being treated as a minority with all that implies, all that disempowerment, all that sense of embarrassment, in their homes they're the majority, right? And in their homes, if they value hospitality supremely, and they have the opportunity to bring youth from the majority to show them what their lives are like, it's an inversion of all roles. And personally, I've been very intrigued by inversion of roles. And you know all this, those of you who practice role play, is that inversion of roles is a very, very healthy process. But again, role plays are kind of artificial. They're in a room like this. We wanted to do the inversion really right in the living environment. Of course, it was very risky, dealing with teenagers, dealing with families that have never done this before, dealing with all sorts of situations. I'm not going to go into the details of some of the challenges that we faced. It was a very high-risk experiment, doing this in a real lived environment. One of the things I learned is that for years I've accepted the